A story came out in the New York Post today that Japanese pitcher Tomoyuki Sugano could be a backup option for teams if they don't get Trevor Bauer. And I think that a team that obviously comes to mind is the New York Mets, because we know that the Mets are connected to Bauer. He is someone that I personally want because I believe he does have very high upside. I know his career numbers are not good, especially his career ERA, but you see that when Bauer's at his best, what he could do. He could be a Cy Young pitcher as far as giving you a really good 2 months, and even more importantly, a great playoff start against the Braves when it matters most against a team you desperately have to beat. So Bauer could help you out, but there's no guarantee that the Mets are going to get him. In fact, I predicted that the Angels are going to get him, and I stand by that. I still think that he could easily end up with the Los Angeles Angels. So the Mets have to say to themselves, okay, well, who else could we get? And I've said before, but when I look at the starting pitching market, and I look at Corey Kluber, and I look at Jake Odorizzi, and I look at Masahiro Tanaka, I see red flags with all of them. I think that there is risk involved in every pitcher, and there's a risk involved in Bauer as well. But I think that Bauer's risk is worth his potential reward of being Cy Young caliber, because with Tanaka and Odorizzi and Kluber and these other starting pitchers, they don't have Cy Young potential. So that's why I like Bauer more than them. Sugano, on the other hand, we don't know enough about him because we haven't seen him on a regular basis. All we could do is go off of the numbers that he's posted in his league. And those numbers, you know what, they're similar to other Japanese pitchers. No, it's similar to Masahiro Tanaka. It's similar to Kenta Maeda. Not quite as good as Yu Darvish as far as ERA, but all in all, he is very comparable to those pitchers. So that gives us an idea of the kind of caliber pitcher he could be. And the New York Post has said that Sugano could be a guy who has a mid-3 ERA. So in this video, I'm going to talk about Sugano, what I think about him, why the Mets could pursue him, and what it could mean for the team. So if you guys like this kind of video, just looking at a random player and analyze them and the potential fit they have with the Mets, make sure to leave a like, comment. What do you think about Sugano? Would he be someone that you'd want to sign over a Bauer or Odorizzi, or how would you want the Mets to approach this? Because one of the big things to keep in mind is he's already 31, which is younger than Tanaka or Darvish or, you know, some of the other Japanese pitchers like Maeda when they were being posted. So that's something interesting to keep in mind. Also, make sure to subscribe. It makes my day. It's a nice gesture. You know, we're working our way towards 1,000 subscribers. We're close to 600. So definitely appreciate everyone that has been liking and supporting and commenting and all that good stuff. Definitely helps the channel grow. So I really appreciate that. So let's talk about Sugano. Now, obviously, the Mets are not looking for an ace. They're not looking for a pitcher that's going to come in there and save the rotation. The Mets already have Jacob deGrom, who is the best pitcher in all of baseball. So they don't need a guy who is ace caliber, but they need somebody in the middle of rotation after deGrom and potentially after Syndergaard or Stroman that could really be reliable, that could be a player that you could count on every 5 days, and that keeps you in the game and doesn't completely blow it within the first few innings like Michael Wacha, who signed with the Tampa Bay Rays today. So that definitely was an interesting signing. But you need someone better than Wacha. So you need someone of a higher caliber. Sugano being a number 3 type starter, it's not exactly what the Mets need, but it isn't bad, because that means that for 2 months, in particular, April and May, you're going to ask Marcus Stroman to be your number 2 pitcher, which he has the capability of. He has that kind of potential. Is he going to do that? He might not, but he could. So let's just say first 2 months, Stroman is your number 2. Then Noah Syndergaard comes back, and once again, like I said, you have to assume that Syndergaard is at his best. So you could have Syndergaard number 2, maybe Stroman number 3, Sugano number 4, and have David Pearson number 5, and you have Lugo in your bullpen. That could get the job done. And one of the other important things about Sugano is that he is not going to cost you as much as it would cost to get Trevor Bauer, because I do think that is going to cost a lot. And I don't want Bauer if the deal is more than 6 years. I'm not doing it. I just don't think that's worth it with any type of player, especially if they're above 30. So I definitely would not do that for Bauer. But I think that for Sugano, you get him cheaper, definitely not as many years, which is always more important in my eyes, because especially once you're targeting free agents that are in their 30s, you want to have the years as low as possible. That is the main reason why I liked McCann over Realmuto. 4 years, even though a lot of people complain about it, is better than 6 or 7 years with JT Realmuto. I mean, Realmuto may be better in the first few, but you still have him for those other few at a very high number. So in Sugano, you are better in that sense. The other problem is that the other starting pitchers on the market aren't that young, other than Taijuan Walker, who is someone I wouldn't mind seeing the Mets bring in, but we haven't really heard them be connected to him quite yet. But these guys like Kluber and Odorizzi and Tanaka, they're all over 30 as well. So as far as age is concerned, you're still taking the same kind of risk. Sugano had an elbow issue, doesn't seem to be a problem. Tanaka has an elbow issue, hasn't bothered him with the Yankees. Sugano also had a back problem, which was an issue for him in 2019, but this year in 2020, he was perfectly fine, pitched very well again, so at least you know that he should be healthy enough. And similar to McCann, if you're not breaking the bank for your starting rotation, it allows you to get George Springer, it allows you to maybe get a Liam Hendricks, or if you can't get George Springer, like we talked about the other day, make a trade for Nolan Arenado. Those are things that could still be on the Mets' radar, but when you got McCann and you took care of your cash needs, it's like, okay, our next need a starting pitcher. So if you can take care of that with Sugano, you're like, okay, now that we have taken care of bullpen with Trevor May, took care of catcher with James McCann, took care of starting pitching with Sugano, and maybe get another starting pitcher, a guy who could be a number 4, number 5. This way you don't have to have Lugo in the rotation or don't have to have Matz in the rotation while you're waiting for Syndergaard to come back. And just to have that overall depth, which is very, very important. That's something that Jared Porter has talked about a lot so far as a member of the Mets general manager, and I really like to hear that because that's what the Mets need to be focused on. So once you do that, you're like, okay, well now we have our needs addressed. Now we could go to our wants, our big-time players that we want. And that means that it clears the path for George Springer. And you say, Springer, what do you want? If it's not, like I said, a crazy 7-year deal like some of these other players want, which I don't think Springer is looking for, here's all the money, let's get George Springer. I just think it is such a perfect scenario right there where, you know what, like I said, you took care of all your needs, now you can just get George Springer. It makes things a lot easier for the Mets. Now, there is always risk involved when you do decide to go overseas and you go into a market like Asia, because, you know what, those numbers, even though they are good numbers that Sugano has had, it isn't Major League Baseball. It's a much stiffer level of competition, because when you look at somebody like Yu Darvish, who had a great ERA in Japan, other than this year where he had an amazing year, but for the entirety of his career, he didn't have years like that. Same goes for Daisuke Matsuzaka, who the Mets had for a very brief stint and was not good with the Mets. He was much better with Boston. And then Tanaka, he's been good in the playoffs, but during the regular season, not great ERA numbers. You know, so Kenta Maeda, same thing goes for him. Not great ERA numbers, still a good pitcher. But you don't expect that Sugano's going to have a low 2 ERA in the major leagues like he did overseas. So we have to keep that in mind. Like, those are not realistic expectations. That's why they say expect him as like a number 3 guy, mid-rotation, which is fine. You know, the Mets could get away with that. I think in an ideal world, if you have DeGrom, obviously, and then Syndergaard could come back and be healthy, it's going to be such a big X factor for the Mets this year. But then again, you have Stroman, you have Sugano, and you have Peterson. That's a good rotation. If you have May, Diaz, and Lugo in the bullpen, you have a good bullpen. And like I said, it allows you to sign George Springer. If you can't get Springer, Arenado. So boom, your lineup is set. Or maybe even DJ LeMahieu. That's a guy we could also talk about later this week. So it just gives you this path to where you could really have a complete team. You don't spend too much money. So what that means is that it allows for that future payroll flexibility. Because one of the other things the Mets should try to do in this offseason at the very tail end is extend Michael Conforto. Because this is going to be the last year of his deal. And extending Michael Conforto is very important for the Mets. Because if they don't do it this year and he has another great year, who knows what Michael Conforto can get on that free agent market. And the Mets are like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money that we have to pay, where we could just sign him while he was already under contract and not pay quite as much, like the Braves have done with some of their players like Acuna and Ozzie Albies. I do think that the Mets should consider that with some of their young players, guys like Conforto or McNeil or Alonso. Get them at a much cheaper cost, but you still keep them for a long time. So the Mets are going to need that future payroll flexibility, and if you're able to address your rotation with Sugano, and we already talked about catcher and things like that, now you can make those other moves that are going to be important to long-term success. We can talk about what the Mets need to do in the offseason to have a good 2021 season. What's more important is what can make the Mets good in 2021 and also be good in the future and for years to come. Not just be good for a few years, but be good for a long time. Be a team that's in the playoffs every single year and is always competitive and has talent on the team. Making these under-the-radar international moves like a Sugano, it could be those missing ingredients that you normally don't think about, because we've spent so much time talking about Bauer, talking about Springer, all these other players, Realmuto, whoever it is, Lindor. But we don't talk about these guys that, you know what, you don't really hear about them that much, and they can make all the difference. And I like that what I've heard from Porter is that he's talked about that a lot, about looking at every kind of market, not the big-time players, but the international, the lower-level guys, and trying to find those hidden gems, like the way he found Zach Gallen with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who's turned out to be a really good young pitcher for them. If the Mets could find their version of a Zach Gallen to put in their rotation, and again, not break the bank so you could do other things and make your team just overall all-around better, that would be a dream case scenario. So it definitely is worth considering if everything checks out, if I can't get Bauer, and who knows, maybe another team could sign on Rizzi. That's the other important thing too, is that I could talk a lot about Bauer, but who knows, maybe some team really likes Rizzi, gives him a bunch of money. Now he's off the board. So now all of a sudden your options are really limited, and you might be better off with a Sugano than some of these other players. So we'll see what happens. The deadline to bid for him is January 7th, so it's coming up pretty soon. So I mean, we'll have a decision on if the Mets got Sugano, or if not, where he is going to go. So definitely interesting to follow. And another very important thing is that Sandy Alderson talked about on WFAN the other day, like looking at the Asian market with some of the players being posted, one of them being Sugano. So the fact that Sandy Alderson is already going to keep that in mind and the Mets are already checking in on it, that's a very interesting sign. And it could be an indicator that if things don't go well with Bauer or some of these other pitchers, they may end up getting Sugano. So it wouldn't surprise me if they did do it. But until the next one, be safe, be smart, be healthy, and let's go Mets.